Hello everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at two M4 Mac Mini docks that have been sent to me by Minisopuru. The docks that we're going to take a look at are the Mini4PRO and the Mini218BPRO. Now the Mini4PRO is a flat dock where the M4 Mac Mini sits on top of it, and the Mini218BPRO is a dock where the Mac Mini is sat on its side. Now some housekeeping before we begin. I just wanted to say that the folks at Minisopuru have sent me these docks for free for me to review and show off to the people on YouTube. Now, no money has been passed through anybody's hands for these products, for these reviews, anything like that. And it was important to me that when I did the review, that the opinions would be that of my own. But in the interest of transparency and keeping the overlords at YouTube happy, this will be a video that is marked as a product placement / paid sponsorship. Even though they haven't paid me, I've just received the items for free. But to stress, what you are seeing today are my own thoughts and opinions with no outside influence. Now, to make things a little bit easier on people rather than just talking about model numbers all the time, I'm going to refer to the Mini4PRO as the flat dock from now on, and I'm going to refer to the Mini218BPRO as the standing dock or sideways dock from this point onwards. So I think what we should do first is unbox and give a little bit of an overview of these two docks. Okay, so we've got two products today. The first one I want to start off with is the stand hub, where it actually sits kind of upright on it, or onto its side, should I say. Have a look what's in the box. Okay, so in the box you get a little toolkit and I assume some kind of heat transfer pad for the SSD, and we'll see if that brings the temperatures down at all. And the actual, I assume this is an SSD kind of retaining bit of rubber. So on the front we've got a couple of USB 2 ports, which I guess they're suggesting to use for keyboard and mice connections, a 10 gigabits per second USB-C pass-through, an SD card, TF card, so I assume the bigger and the smaller SD card. And on the side here they've got a headphone out, which I assume could be used as a line out as well. And on the side here they've got a USB 3, 10 gigabits per second Type A connector. And under here I believe is where the SSD itself goes. Let's have a little look under here. There's a little screwdriver. Included screwdriver isn't brilliant, but hopefully at this point you'd have some better tools in your toolkit. And this is where the SSD goes, and it looks like it has spaces so you can put in the stopper for all the different common sizes of SSD. So whatever drive you have, it looks like it will work in there, which is good. Okay, and let's move on to their flat style stand where the machine just sits on top of it. You've got the info on the back here for you to look at, and it's got a little cutout for the power button apparently as well, which is nice. Okay, so this is what we've got in here. Let's pull out the main dock for a second. And I assume there'll be a cable here as well. Yep. Okay, and in here you've got a similar amount of accessories, but this one actually has a small braided removable cable, which is nice. Compared to the other one where the cable is actually fixed on, which not a huge fan of. Initially I'd like to see a USB-C port so it could be removed. Because, you know, especially over time, connectors and things like that, they can actually break and go bad, so it'd be nice to be able to pull it out and replace it. So looking on the front here you can see that they've got USB 2 ports, which they obviously want you to use for keyboard and mouse, an SD card, and I assume a micro SD card, TF card style reader there. And on the back they have got another USB 2 port, an HDMI port on this one, which is nice, and a USB-C connection. Now I assume this is for the host connection, and obviously a headphone out, which I assume could probably be used for line out as well. Notice that there are no USB Type-C pass-through ports or USB 3-speed ports on this one, which is interesting and maybe a turn-off for some people. Now yet again on the bottom of this one you can see that you've got a flap for the removable SSD cover, and using the little included screwdriver, which yet again isn't great, it will reveal to you a similar kind of system, but in this one it's got a slightly different design because it includes a standoff that I assume you slide into it for the appropriate SSD size. Very much like so. And that is how you actually fix the SSD down. So is it a better mounting point? Is it not? I suppose time will tell, but they both, I imagine, will generally work. So I think what I need to do now is go away and run some tests on these and just see how they work. Okay, so that was an overview of both the docks. I just want to say they do share some common features. They both have a KT micro audio adapter, which is capable of 96 kilohertz, either 16 or 24 bits, and they both have a card reader, which during testing gained about 97 megabytes per second read and about 25 megabytes per second write. Now, one of the reasons the write may be so low is because the SD card I've got, even though it's capable of 80 megabytes per second write, was only doing about 25, and I verified this in another SD card reader and it was doing the same. Unfortunately, I don't have any more SD cards that are kind of fast enough to really test the readers built into the systems with, but I'm going to assume that it's just down to my SD card there. Now let's focus on one of the main reasons people are probably going to want these docks for, and that will be the NVMe drive enclosures. Now, I've tested this with a Western Digital 500GB NVMe drive using Amorphous Disk Mark. Now, the flat stand, as I've been calling it, has got a read speed of 880.71 megabytes per second and a write of 903 megabytes per second. Now, the upright stand has got a read speed of 857.38 and a write of 878.18 with this particular SSD. Now, the standalone Ugreen enclosure that I had on this same SSD got about 759.77 read and a write of 900.62 megabytes per second. Now, it's worth noting that I also tried a Kioxia 1TB NVMe drive on my main system at home in the docks, and the read speed was about the same, but the write speeds were actually higher, and the flat dock got 1004.69 megabytes per second on the write, and the standing dock got 996.18 megabytes per second on the write itself. So I suppose it's going to depend a little bit on the particular drive you're using and how it's set up, but they're pretty much very similar in performance, give a little bit here or there. So now we need to talk about one of the main concerns that people have been having with any of these kind of aluminium-based Mac Mini docks, and that is Wi-Fi speed and interference. Now, why would this be an issue? Well, on the bottom of the Mac Mini, the Wi-Fi antennas are actually kind of in the little plastic section underneath it. So if you put the Mac Mini on top of anything that is metal, that is going to potentially degrade your Wi-Fi signal. Now, one of the reasons for this is because RF actually struggles at higher frequencies to penetrate objects. Now, one of the reasons for this is because 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz, the wavelengths of them are so kind of small, it's actually really difficult for them to penetrate objects and get through without causing any interference or degradation in signal. So that's why I thought it was important to run some Wi-Fi tests. Now we're going to do two Wi-Fi tests. We're going to do one here at my work unit where the access point is literally just right there. I'm looking at it right now. It's really close. And we were doing the tests right behind my head. So there was not a lot of room, or a lot of distance, should I say, for the signals to have to go to overcome any interference. Now, to make this as scientific and as accurate as I possibly could, I used something called Open Speed Test, which is a self-hosted speed test server, which I just, ran on one of my machines in the building here. Now, direct via cable, I got a speed of 986.7 down and 899.1 up. Now, using the Wi-Fi without the stand, I got 706 down, 714.9 up. And when I was using the flat dock, I got 708.5 down and 697.8 up. And using the stand dock, I got 705.6 down and 697.5 up. So all in all, in this scenario, the difference is totally minimal. It doesn't really make a lot of difference when you're this close to the Wi-Fi source. Now, in my house is a different matter. The Wi-Fi was going to a Ubiquiti access point, but it had to go through quite a solid brick wall. And that is one of those scenarios where it'll introduce interference and a loss of signal. Now, I want to explain DBM very briefly and in layman's terms for you. DBM is basically the gain of the signal when it comes to Wi-Fi antennas and radio frequencies and things like that. The lower the minus number on the DBM scale, the better quality the signal is. But the higher the number is on the minus scale, the worse the signal is. Now, ideally, you don't want a signal in the Wi-Fi world to be going above kind of the mid-60s to the 70s in the minuses on the DBM, because that is when you're going to start to really lose a lot of your speed and have issues with connectivity, and then have issues with, balance between the access point and the client and actually the amount of retries it has to do, and you just won't be having a good experience. With no dock, I was getting 54.4 down and 59.8 up with minus 75 dBm. So that's kind of right on the cusp of a good experience there. Now with the flat dock, I was getting 37.5 down and 25.6 up, but I had minus 80 dBm, which is just not a good enough signal. But as you can see, the difference of 5 dBm here does actually make a big difference in the real world. And that can lead to things stuttering when you're viewing websites and online streaming media. If you're doing FaceTime calls, video calls, they just will not be working properly. But as I said, we are right there on the fringe, on the extreme edge cases of a good signal. And it is worth noting that if you are on those kind of scenarios, you may actually have issues running Wi-Fi with your Mac Mini with the flat dock. However, with the dock that mounts the Mac Mini on its side, things get even better. Now this will be yet again because of antenna placement, and the Mac Mini will no longer be trying to get its Wi-Fi signals through a table or a desk or anything like that. And also sometimes antenna polarity, whether it's going this way or this way, compared to how the access point is. The access point in my house is slightly on the side because it's not mounted flat up on a ceiling. It's kind of mounted this way on a ceiling on a bit which droops down. So that can sometimes help having the polarities getting slightly closer to matching as well with your general signal strength. It's worth noticing that I got minus 65 dBm, which is a much better signal. Though I will say my Wi-Fi access points and the hardware itself on the Mac Mini decided that it'd be better to have a connection at a Wi-Fi 4 speed, which is 2.4 gigahertz. And that got 41.2 down and 27.3 up. But the thing is that that'll probably be quite a usable signal because of the dBm being in a range where it's, you know, it's acceptable. Sure, you'd like it to be a bit better, you know, in the 50s is great, but that should still be pretty usable and you should still have a decent enough experience there. So in my conclusion on the Wi-Fi side of things, if you're in a room where you have fringe Wi-Fi or you just want to get the best Wi-Fi experience possible, then quite possibly having the dock where the Mac Mini sits up on its side might actually be an even better option than just having the Mac Mini straight on a table. So I now want to talk about the things I like and I don't like about these docks. So the things I like about both docks is they perform as advertised. They do what they say on the tin, and I've had no reliability issues with them at all. I've had no disconnections of any of the drives, any of the USB devices plugged in. Everything has kind of worked as it should. I haven't had any issues with heat buildup. I haven't had any issues with my Wi-Fi or my Bluetooth connections with them when they're kind of right next to it. So as far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't be a detriment, either of them, to your setup in that regard. And you know, the performance of the drives have also stayed consistent. I haven't had any issues with reduced speed or anything like that. So yeah, considering an NVMe drive is one of the main reasons you'd probably want to buy one of these docks, it works pretty good. Obviously, it's only USB-C 10 gig speeds, but at this budget, you're just not going to get a Thunderbolt dock at all. And I think for most people, even video editing off of these, unless you're using like ProRes and RAW files and everything at 8K, you're probably not going to have any big issues. Now, I have to say, one of the things for me that makes these docks so useful is the fact that you have good access to the power button. Now, I know a lot of people leave their machines on all the time, but I am not one of those people. I like to shut my computers off. I especially have to do it here because I have a lot of equipment attached to the main power board here, and I just do not want to be running my speakers, my monitors, and any vintage audio equipment I have attached to these 24/7 with power. Just not how I do it. It's a fire hazard. So having that easy access to turn the machines on and off on both of them is great. And I particularly enjoy the flat dock and the way it's got the cutout. Yeah, it's been a game changer for me, and I would probably buy it just for that personally. Now I want to talk about the negatives of these docks, because they're not perfect, even though they're pretty good. Now I'm going to talk about the standing dock first. This is one of those things which, if you look at the marketing and the advertisements, you'll see that they've shown it with no cables attached. And you know why they've done that? Because it just looks incredibly messy when you've got the Mac Mini and the dock loaded up with cables. It's just like one of those things where you look at it and you think, wow, there are cables everywhere. It's not a clean solution in my opinion. However, if you're over function rather than form and can forgive that, the features that it has are good. Now, on this dock, I would really like to have seen a removable USB-C cable for the host connection. I don't know why they didn't do that. That seems like a big oversight, because especially if the cable gets damaged or frayed or the connector breaks, as it sometimes does with USB-C, you've pretty much got to scrap the whole dock. And I've had this thing apart and opened and looked into it. It's not designed to be easily desoldered from the board and replaced. So that is something to bear in mind. If you break the cable on that dock, you're throwing the dock away. And that is a real shame to me. Also, what I don't understand is why they've got ports on pretty much every single side apart from one. Why couldn't they consolidate it a bit more? I would have liked to see the 10 gig USB-A port either on the front of the dock or on the same side where the headphone jack is. So that way you just don't have to have literally something coming out of almost every side of it. It just looks a bit untidy in my opinion. Now I know the dock is meant to be able to be used to like rest your phone up against it and things like that as well. And that may be why they have it on the side. But also another option they could have done, for me in my opinion, is have it so the dock is actually straight forward and the front of the Mac Mini is looking at you, and all of the ports are on the front, the SD card and the USBs, and on the back where the non-removable USB-C cable is, they just have the headphone jack and maybe one of the USB-A ports. I don't know why it had to be on the side. That's what I do. I wouldn't bother having the phone mount there. It just seems a bit silly, and I think it could look a lot cleaner that way. But that's just my personal preference. Some of you may look at this and go, do you know what, actually that is perfect for me, that's how I want it, that's how I want to have my Mac Mini. So that is subjective. But from a cleanliness and looking neat perspective, I don't think it quite hits the mark. Though I do think on the standing dock, had they managed to include an HDMI port, that probably would have been one of the most ultimate kind of Mac Mini docks regarding functionality out there on the market. But I'm going to assume that's not there because of a limit of the USB-C 10 gig standard, and then they'd probably have to make it Thunderbolt for everything to work at the correct kind of speeds and not have any bottlenecks anywhere, and that moves the price point. So I understand why it's not kind of there. Now I want to talk about the flat dock now and some of the things I'm not overly fond of on it. Now, my particular example hasn't got the best colour match, in my opinion. The standing dock had a much better colour match on the aluminium, but that could be just a specific kind of run of them, or they could change colour ever so slightly during their processes of anodizing. I assume it's anodized. So that may not be every single one. That might just be mine. It's not a huge deal, but it is just something worth noting that it's not quite perfect, but it's more than good enough, and it looks a lot better than just having some random kind of USB-C enclosure just hanging off the back of the machine underneath the table or wherever. Now, while the HDMI output does support 4K 60, it doesn't support 1080p, 120 or 144 or anything like that. It would only do 60 Hertz. I suppose I understand that's, you know, perhaps it going over USB-C or just kind of the limitations of the chipset or controller they use and it not being Thunderbolt. That is what it is. That's just something worth noting. It's probably not going to be a big issue to most people, but I was kind of hoping maybe to run a couple of kind of high refresh rate displays in my setup at home through it, and I can't do that with this particular dock, but never mind. Now, my biggest gripe with this is that there are no USB 3 or USB-C pass-through ports. Now, I spoke to the guys in the tech department of Minisopuru, and they told me that the reason for this is because USB 3 introduces a lot of interference on the 2.4 GHz band, and that is where Bluetooth lives and obviously part of your Wi-Fi connection. And that is something I have seen before. These monitors that I've got behind me, when I have USB 3 devices plugged into them, it totally annihilates my Bluetooth. So I understand that. But it's a shame that they couldn't perhaps figure it out with perhaps some shielding or something like that, or maybe there could have been some more research done into it. Hopefully there would be a second generation where they can possibly do that. And, you know, yet again, it's obviously because the Mac Mini is sitting directly on top of that particular dock with the antennas facing down on top of it. And that means that's more likely to pick up the interference and have kind of, you know, possibly a reduced or impaired kind of connectivity anyway from the antennas just being on top of a big slab of metal. Now, we do have to talk about the biggest elephant in the room that I haven't spoken about yet, and that is the headphone output. Now you look at the flat dock and the headphone output is on the rear, and on the standing dock, the headphone output is on the side near the non-removable USB-C cable. Now, one would assume that you would use those to plug into a set of desktop speakers or some kind of line out going into a mixer or something like those, because hey, the Mac Mini already has a decent quality headphone port on the front of it. So for plugging in headphones, that kind of makes the ones in the dock redundant. But the reason these have been marketed as headphones and not line outs is because of the incredible ground loop / buzz that happens when the machine is turned off and they're connected.
Okay, so I hope you can still hear the buzzing. It only happens when the machine is off and it's all connected. But if I turn it back on and wait for the display to come alive, it then just kind of goes away.
Now, it's quite bizarre this, because when the dock is on and running, and this applies to both of them, there is no ground loop, there is no hum, there are no buzzing, there is no nothing, and it all works as it should. But as soon as you turn off the Mac Mini with the dock still connected, you get a big bah, mains hum buzz. Now, why is that? I spoke to the guys in the technical department and they told me that it's because when the dock is turned off, the headphone output is actually then isolated from the ground planes, which the USB and all the other ports on the dock share. For some reason that I can't work out, and my father, who is an electrical engineer and has done research and development for large amplifier and electronics companies and has worked on this thing since the 1960s, also can't figure out. And it's really weird that they disconnect the ground and have the ground as floating when the dock is turned off, because when the dock is turned on, the ground is connected all times. It is connected through to the headphone out, through to the USB ports, to the Mac Mini itself via the USB-C cable. Now, this is clearly a design oversight, and I decided I was going to fix it. So what I did was take a bodge wire, as they call it in the industry, from the ground port on the headphone socket and put it to the ground plane of the USB or / the main PCB. And guess what? That fixed all of my issues. That did not introduce any interference or any noise whatsoever. So I don't really understand why this wasn't done from factory. And most people that I've spoken to who also have electronics knowledge can't figure it out either. Now, this is something I did bring up with the tech team, and I explained to them what I did for my fix and how it has worked with no issues. And it's something they're going to test themselves and potentially do in-house. So if there is a second revision of this, it may turn out that they'll actually fix it and be able to market it as a line out. Now, I believe that's why it was not marketed as a line out, because of these buzzing issues. And they were aware of it because they had a good explanation, which obviously at this point you've seen because I've included the email in an overlay on the screen so you can read it yourself. So if you only intend to use that audio output for headphones, you're not going to have an issue. You won't have any issues with headphones directly connected because there's going to be no grounds trying to be shared between devices plugged into the mains and the dock and the Mac Mini. So you're not going to have any ground loop, you're not going to have any buzz, and it'll be okay. But as I said, if you're going to use it as a line out, think of a different solution. Or, and I can't, recommend it because who knows, you might break something, you might break your computer. I'm not being held liable for that. You can do the bodge mod that I did, and you'll probably be fine. So let's close this out and I'll give you my final thoughts. Overall, I have to say, price-wise, they seem pretty competitive for what they offer. There are other docks and there are other manufacturers making similar things there out on the market. But obviously, it's one of those where you can look at what you've seen today and you can look at those and see how the specs and features compare. I haven't tested any other docks, so I can't give you an opinion on them. I can only give you an opinion on what I have tested, which are these two docks that have been sent to me. I will put a link to the manufacturer's website below so you can look and you can potentially buy these docks if you want to. There's no affiliate link, by the way. I'm not getting any money if you click on these links, so it's not one of those. Just have a look for your own sake. Now, the big decision out of these two is which one would I own? Well, I'm going for the Mini4PRO, which is the flat dock. I think it's the one that looks the cleanest. It adds on the most features that I personally need. Okay, it hasn't got USB-C pass-through or USB 3, but for that easy access of the power button, for having an included NVMe drive enclosure in there, and the fact that it will allow me to plug in things like, keyboard and mice and like little dongles and stuff like that into it without any real worry, and the SD card for pulling footage on and off my camera. It's great. It looks the cleanest in my setup. It doesn't have any impact on me for Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, so I'm pretty happy with that, and that is the one that'll be staying and in use with me. Now the Mini218BPRO I think is the best all-rounder if you are over function rather than form and need as much out of your dock as you can. I would recommend that to people as well. Yet again, it's going to depend on aesthetics and what you require. Now, one last thing in my final thoughts that I think is worth mentioning to people, if you do load these up with lots of cables and lots of accessories and plug everything in, the Mac Mini can slide about on the docks a little bit, that's both of them. So it is just worth noting that. But if you're generally careful with them and not kind of being too vicious when you plug and unplug things, you should be okay. So overall, I want to say thank you to Minisopuru for sending me over these docks. I've had a great time testing them and I've enjoyed using them, and they will be used in my setups in one form or another. So for now, I'd like to say, as always, I am Will. This has been another random tech video, and I'll see you all in the next one.